My name is Amanda. I'm 28 years old, and just 7 months ago, I watched my mother die and then live again. I always believed disasters announce themselves with shattering glass or sirens, something loud enough to tear the sky wide open. My mother's disaster, however, began with the faintest tremor in a coffee mug. It was a Sunday morning in late April, the kind where sunlight threads itself through kitchen blinds like delicate embroidery. Mom hummed Sinatra while flipping blueberry pancakes. She could never remember the lyrics, so every chorus dissolved into tuneless diddadas that made me laugh harder than any perfect note ever could. We had a ritual. I brewed the coffee. She sculpted breakfast into works of art, and together we pretended calories were mythical creatures that only lived in other people's kitchens. That morning felt especially golden. The tulips outside the window popped open like tiny trumpets, and Mom's garden, her pride, her therapy, her daily sermon, looked as if an impressionist painter had spilled every shade of pink onto the soil. She wore her plant kindness apron, the one stained with last year's tomato harvest, and teased me about my bedhead while I poured 2 mugs of Ethiopian roast. She reached for her cup, fingers steady as a conductor's baton, then paused. The mug rattled against the countertop, just once, as if a mosquito had bumped it, but I saw a ripple skate across the surface of the coffee. Her smile faltered so slightly I almost missed it. She blew on the steam, lifted the mug again, and this time her hand trembled like a violin note held too long. Amber liquid sloshed over the rim and stained the countertop a muddy brown. "Mom, you okay?" I asked, half laughing, because I'd already mapped the moment. She'd make a joke about caffeine jitters, I'd roll my eyes, and life would proceed in neat pixels. Instead, she set the mug down with exaggerated care and pressed her palm to her chest, as though checking that her own heartbeat still liked its choreography. "Just a flutter," she said, voice airy. My ticker must have heard OL blue eyes and decided to dance. I laughed. It felt compulsory, then stepped closer. Her face held that particular shade of pale only painters try to capture, waxy porcelain beneath 2 bright eyes. She rubbed her sternum, a gesture quick as erasing a chalkboard, then busied herself, wiping the spill. "Mom," I said again, this time with the gravity of an eclipse. "Sit." She obeyed, maybe because the word left no room for negotiation. I crouched beside her. Pulse. Fast, irregular. Skin clammy. I knew the signs. My childhood was peppered with her arrhythmia checkups, but she'd been stable for 5 years. Her cardiologist called it predictable. It felt like discovering the word trust had a silent expiration date printed on its underside. The tremor subsided. Mom regained color, insisted she felt fine. We ate lukewarm pancakes, drizzled with silence. Afterward, she went outside to deadhead tulips, claiming she needed petal therapy. From the window, I watched her kneel in the damp earth, hands steady as she pinched wilted flowers, but her shoulders sagged with an invisible weight. That night, while washing dishes, I heard her drop a plate in the living room. The shatter was small, a china saucer splitting into 2 clean halves, but my heart crashed harder. She blamed slippery fingers. I blamed the flutter that had turned her heartbeat into Morse code. I begged her to let me drive her to urgent care. She waved me off with a garden-gloved hand and kissed my forehead, leaving a faint crescent of soil. "Tomorrow, darling," she promised. "Don't draft trouble before it arrives." Then she told me to get some rest, as if sleep could barricade worry. I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the house breathe, fridge hum, clock tick, wind gossiping through window panes. At 2:17 a.m., a timestamp tattooed on my memory, Mom's footsteps creaked down the hallway. I met her in the doorway. Moonlight sliced her face into silver and shadow, highlighting sweat at her temples. "It's back," she whispered and collapsed into my arms with the quiet politeness she reserved for library aisles. Her body felt unnervingly light, as though bones had betrayed her and turned to glass. I called 911. My voice sounded foreign, like a tape rewound too many times. While we waited, I counted her breaths, rapid, shallow, each one a coin slipping through fingers. She tried to speak, The words came out as wisps. "I'm sorry," she managed. I hushed her, but she gripped my wrist with surprising strength and said, "Listen, if I forget who I am, you remember for me." The ambulance snapped the night in half with red-white strobes. EMTs flooded the living room, their equipment clattering like cymbals at a concert we never bought tickets for. They asked questions. I answered, mouth on autopilot. Mom drifted in and out, eyes tracing corners of the ceiling only she could see. As they wheeled her toward the door, she reached for me. Our fingers brushed, and in that single spark of contact, I felt every bedtime story she'd ever read, every scraped knee she'd kissed, every off-key Sinatra note she'd sung while flipping pancakes. Then the stretcher vanished into the siren-lit darkness. On the ride to the hospital, I sat in the front of the ambulance, hands clenched around the strap of my bag. Through the small square window, I saw her body bouncing with each pothole, a marionette jerked by invisible strings. The monitor beeped, a frantic metronome racing a song I didn't know the lyrics to. I realized disasters are quiet only at the beginning. They save their thunder for the moment your heart is close enough to shatter. And so the ordinary thread of my life, Sunday pancakes, garden tulips, Mom's tuneless humming, was severed. I stepped from the ambulance into fluorescent chaos, unaware that in less than 24 hours I would watch nurses pull a sheet over my mother's face, and that 15 minutes later, I would learn the universe, sometimes rewrites endings while the ink is still wet. The ER entrance at Riverside Medical is a neon wound in the night, automatic doors hissing open as if the building itself is gasping for breath. When the EMTs rolled Mom through, the overhead lights, clinical, merciless, turned her skin into wax. I followed 2 steps behind, clutching my phone like a lifeline, thumbs hovering above Dad's contact but too paralyzed to press call. I kept thinking if I said the words out loud, "Mom's dying," I'd crystallize them into fact. A triage nurse asked Mom's birth date. Mom answered, voice paper thin. March 12th, 1965, then fell silent, eyelids trembling in REM sleep flickers though she wasn't dreaming. They slid her onto a trauma bay gurney labeled Bed 7. 7, my childhood lucky number, felt suddenly sinister. Nurses stripped off the plant kindness apron, scissors slicing through the tie like wet ribbon. Somewhere between the foreplacement and the sticky ECG pads, I lost track of human faces, everyone blurred into mask and goggles silhouettes shouting systolic readings and med dosages that bounced off the walls like ricochets. Mom's blood pressure plunged, 80/40, then 74. They bolus fluids, added dopamine, and the number crawled up like a stubborn toddler. Dr. Rao, ER attending, darted in, eyes sharp behind fogged lenses. Likely myocarditis or acute cardiomyopathy, he told the team, but his choice of words, likely, felt like throwing darts at a hurricane. He glanced at me and softened his tone. We'll know more after the echo. An orderly wheeled in a portable ultrasound, the probe cold and silver as moonlight. On the screen, Mom's heart fluttered in B-mode gray, walls barely contracting, ventricles swimming in lethargic blood. Rao exhaled. Ejection fractions tanking. I'd studied enough WebMD to know healthy hearts pump out 60% of their volume. Hers burped, maybe 15. Rao ordered a cardiology consult stat and turned to me. We may have to move her to the ICU immediately. Do you have any questions? I wanted to ask if she'd survive the elevator ride. Instead, should I call my father? Yes, he said, certainty cutting through code speak. Call now. I stepped into the hallway where the walls were the color of old toothpaste. Dial tone. Dad answered on the second ring, voice thick with chemo day exhaustion. He'd finished his 3rd round for prostate cancer only 2 weeks earlier. Sweetheart. Words jammed. You need to come. Now. Silence, then the rustle of a coat, keys jingling. He didn't ask for details. Some disasters speak fluent telepathy. When I returned, a second doctor in midnight blue scrubs, the cardiologist, Dr. Nguyen, was already threading a Swan-Ganz catheter into Mom's neck, guided by ultrasound. Saline dripped, beeps overlapped. Mom grimaced but didn't flinch, the The sedation must have blurred pain into distance. I squeezed her hand. It felt cool, like porcelain left on a windowsill. Gwen addressed me without pausing. We're moving her upstairs. She's in cardiogenic shock. We'll stabilize with inotropes, maybe an intra-aortic balloon pump if her pressure doesn't respond. We'll talk transplantation candidacy once labs come back. Transplantation. The word detonated inside my skull. New heart, waitlist, organ availability, months or never. Yet a strange hope ignited. At least there was a road forward, even if it was paved with broken glass. The ICU transport team arrived, 2 nurses and a respiratory therapist steering a ventilator tower the size of a refrigerator. They transferred Mom onto a traveling bed, tubes swaying like jellyfish tentacles. I walked beside as they rolled her toward the elevators. Each wheel's squeak echoed down the corridor, a metronome measuring dread. The elevator doors opened onto a steel box saturated with disinfectant scent. We squeezed in, Mom, machines, staff, and me pinned against mirror-polished walls that reflected our fear from every angle. The therapist pumped oxygen through an amber bag, hiss-release, until we reached floor 3, cardiovascular intensive care. The ICU corridor resembled a spaceship, glass pods with sliding doors, monitors blinking alien hieroglyphs. They docked Mom in room 314. 314, pi, the endless number. I clung to the math. Maybe endless meant survival. A resident inserted a radial arterial line. I lost count of the needles. Drips sprouted. Milrinone, norepinephrine, heparin. Alarms erupted when her pressure dipped again. The team increased vasopressors, their faces lit by monitor light, green for pulse, red for danger. Dad arrived breathless, cheeks flushed winter pink. When he saw Mom, something inside him folded. His shoulders sank as if gravity localized onto his bones alone. He kissed her brow, whispered, "I'm here," then asked Nguyen to translate the beeps. Nguyen replied with numbers. Cardiac index 1.6, wedge pressure 26. Dad nodded like an engineer plotting failure points on a bridge. Night pressed against glass. City lights flickered beyond the blackout curtains. Hours blurred. Nurse shift change. ABG draws. Chest X-ray revealing pulmonary edema like clouds filling a valley. At 4 a.m., a perfusionist wheeled in a console for potential ECMO standby. Seeing that machine, extracorporeal life support, felt like welcoming a substitute soul. Around dawn, Mom opened her eyes for 3 seconds. They were amber, lucid. She tried to speak, tube muffling sound. I read her lips. Garden? My chest fractured. I told her the tulips were blooming riotously. I lied and said I'd water them. Truth. They were already wilting in morning frost, but some lies serve as morphine. By mid-morning, labs labeled her as a status 1A transplant candidate, the highest priority. Transplant coordinator Rodriguez appeared with binders of consent forms printed on paper far heavier than grief. Dad signed with shaking hands. I initialed where adult children do. Rodriguez spoke of donor matches, blood type AB positive rarity, cold ischemic times. Her calmness felt surgical, a scalpel slicing chaos into manageable sections. At noon, the balloon pump arrived, a nylon-covered sausage threaded through Mom's femoral artery, set to inflate and deflate with each heartbeat, Afterload's invisible dance partner. It raised her pressure by 10 points. For an hour the room exhaled relief. Then, at 1:14 p.m., the timestamp etched in the nurse's log, her heart slipped into a malignant rhythm, pulseless electrical activity. Code blue. I was ushered into the hallway while they performed CPR. Through glass I saw Dr. Nguyen compressing her chest, ventilator bellows flashing silver. Someone delivered epinephrine. Another nurse prepared atropine. After 8 minutes they restored a rhythm. Nguyen exited, sweat beading at his temples. We stabilized, but the next arrest could be irreversible. His voice carried the cadence of a weather forecast nobody wanted. Storms likely, shelter doubtful. That evening, as sun slid past the skyline, palliative care Dr. Stella visited. She spoke gently about goals of care and quality of life, phrases disguised as hope but weighted like gravestones. She laid out possibilities: intubation forever, ECMO complications, transplant prospects slim in short time frames. Dad's hands rubbed each other raw. Mine picked at a coffee cup lid until foam bled. Mom floated in propofol dreams while we debated her future within earshot of her subconscious. Finally, exhausted, we agreed to one more night of support, one more sunrise before decisions. A nurse dimmed the lights. Machines hummed lullabies in minor keys. At 11 p.m., Dad dozed in a plastic recliner. I whispered promises into Mom's ear. I told her our garden needed planting, that blueberry pancakes awaited new Sundays, that Sinatra still owed her a duet. She didn't stir, but the monitor screen flickered a tiny spike above baseline, maybe artifact, maybe acknowledgement. I stepped into the corridor and saw my reflection in the window. Face pale, eyes bloodshot, a daughter excavated to bedrock. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and prayed to every deity who traffics in second chances. Please, keep her heartbeat moving, even if it's on borrowed time. Little did I know that within 24 hours, staff would be calling time of death, a white sheet would cover my mother's face, and the universe would test its own rules less than 15 minutes later. Morning inside the ICU doesn't look like any dawn I ever trusted. It arrives behind blackout curtains, filtered through fluorescents that never sleep, so you learn to tell time by the rotation of nurses instead of the rising sun. At 6:15 a.m., a new shift brought fresh scrubs and a coffee odor sharp enough to slice grief. I watched them read Mom's chart, eyes skimming lines that spelled out the battlefront. Cardiogenic shock, IABP in situ. Status 1, a transplant candidate, high lactate. Dr. Nguyen returned with grand rounds, 3 fellows, 2 residents, and delivered the night report. No arrests since yesterday's code. Balloon pump holding map at 68. Urine output low but present. He said it the way one describes a fragile truce, hopeful but aware the next bullet could come from any direction. Then he spoke the words I had dreaded. Multi-organ failure looms. Kidneys showing distress, liver enzymes doubling. We're racing clock biology now, he said, as if biology were a villain whispering through the vents. Dad leaned forward, voice papery. How long before the clock wins? Nguyen hesitated. 1 beat. 2. We measure in hours. Hours. The syllable tasted like rust. They ordered continuous renal replacement therapy, dialysis for the desperately unstable. Machines rolled in like siege engines, tubing tangling with drip lines. I felt I was overseeing a construction site where the blueprint changed hourly, each new scaffold propped against the collapse of the last. 8 a.m. The transplant coordinator reappeared. No matches overnight. AB-positive donors are rare, she reminded us gently, as if rarity were a trivia fact, not a guillotine. She listed regional centers on standby: Chicago, Des Moines, Cleveland, but weather-grounded flights in 2 of them. Even the sky conspired. 10:30 a.m. Chaplain Morales stopped by, offering prayer. Dad said yes. I nodded, though faith now felt like a language I'd forgotten to conjugate. We circled the bed. Morales spoke of Lazarus. I traced the pulse oximeter's green sine waves, tiny mountain ranges rising and falling as though mapping a country threatened by sea. Noon. Labs returned worse. Creatinine vaulted. Lactate above 6. Nguyen suggested escalating to ECMO, full artificial heart-lung support, but warned it might only extend the agony if no donor surfaced. Dad chewed his lower lip until it bled. The crimson matched the arterial line's tubing. We asked Mom's advance directive file from the safe. She'd never filled it out. Choice fell to us, and choice is a cruel privilege. 2:17 p.m. Exactly 12 hours since I had first dialed 911, another echo showed ventricular walls thinning further. Like tissue paper, the fellow murmured. They increased milrinone. BP climbed 3 points, then sank 5. Progress felt like rearranging deck chairs on a ship that already kissed iceberg. Dad and I slipped into the family consult room, 4 chairs, a box of tissues, and a watercolor print of a lighthouse that mocked us with its promise of guidance. We argued in hushed tones. Dad wanted ECMO. Any chance is chance. I countered that Mom would hate an existence of tubes and sedation, waiting to be saved by a stranger's tragedy. We ended holding hands, sobbing apologies into each other's shoulders. 4 p.m. Gwyn returned with a gravity that bent the air. He spoke plainly. Organs failing in cascade. ECMO likely only to postpone the inevitable. No donor on the horizon. He recommended discussing comfort measures. The euphemism landed like ash in my mouth. We stood at Mom's bedside. I took her hand, cold, bloated, and whispered everything I'd rehearsed at 3 a.m. The tulips will bloom again. I'll water them. Dad's chemo is working. Please don't worry. A tear slipped from the corner of her closed eye, tracing the tape that secured the ventilator tube. The nurse wiped it gently. I wanted to scream that tears meant she was still here. 6:45 p.m. The ethics committee confirmed our authority to withdraw aggressive support if we chose. Dad signed forms with a pen that skittered from sweat. I initialed next to him, letters jagged as seismographs. We set a deadline, midnight. If no donor call came, we'd let her rest. I texted my brother Liam, stationed overseas. Come on video. Mom may slip tonight. Time zones folded. His tired face filled my phone. Eyes red. Uniform collar unbuttoned. I held the screen to Mom's ear while he recited childhood memories, her hot chocolate recipe, her backstage pep talks before his high school plays. Her eyelids didn't flutter, yet the heart monitor jumped 2 beats faster, as if registering recognition in Morse code. 9:10 p.m. The sky outside melted into tar. Nurses dimmed lights. Machines glowed like distant constellations. I crawled into the narrow space beside Mom, lay my head on her shoulder, and listen to the balloon pumps whoosh, inflate on diastole, deflate on systole, mechanical lullaby. Dad stroked Mom's hair, humming Sinatra's Fly Me to the Moon. No Didados this time. He knew the lyrics by heart now, bartered from sleep and fear. 10:55 p.m. Pagers silent. Phone silent. I began to bargain with universes I didn't believe in. Take my years, graft them onto hers, erase every selfish choice I ever made. I promised to visit church, temple, mosque, whatever architecture housed grace. 11:42 p.m. Gwyn entered, solemn, eyes gentle. No donor, he said. Dad nodded. I felt the world tilt, but gravity kept me upright. Grief can be strangely polite. We agreed to start morphine drip at midnight, reduce vasopressors, disconnect balloon pump. Gwyn asked if we wanted the ventilator kept until final breaths. We said yes, finished gently. 11:58 p.m. I kissed Mom's forehead, tasted saline from her dried sweat. Dad whispered, "It's okay to rest." The nurse lowered norepinephrine. BP slid downward like a curtain call. I watched numbers fall. 60, 52, 45, alarm threshold silenced. The balloon pump hissed one final sigh as they clamped and removed it, a serpent retreating. When the clock clicked to 12:06 a.m., Mom's blood pressure flattened to dashes. The pulse waveform collapsed. The monitor announced asystole with a monochrome line. Gwyn checked carotid, pupils. Time of death recorded. 0:07 hours. A nurse folded the sheet over Mom's face, white cotton veil that erased the woman I knew. My knees buckled. Dad caught me. We stood in the fluorescent hush. Orchestra ended. Only static left. I thought death would feel like a door slamming. Instead, it was a whisper receding down a hallway you cannot follow. I didn't know then that 15 minutes later the hallway would reverse, and the impossible would walk back through the door. The clock on the far wall glowed 12:08 a.m., 1 minute after the declaration, yet already the room felt older, like a house abandoned the hour the deed is signed. Mom lay beneath the white sheet, her outline more geometry than person, tubes still braided across her body, but everything else had been unplugged, silenced, left to cool. A curtain of hush settled, thick, almost sticky, broken only by the mechanical sigh of the ventilator still idling on standby, as if uncertain how to breathe by itself now that its partner had quit. Nurse Danielle moved with reverent economy, switching the monitor to silent mode, coiling ECG leads into tidy circles. Every click of plastic against plastic sounded funereal, a rosary of medical detritus. She whispered, "I'm sorry for your loss." First condolence of the night, and backed away, granting us privacy the way priests leave mourners alone with a coffin. Dad loosened his tie and sat heavily, elbows on knees, palms over eyes. His shoulders shook, no sound escaping, an earthquake without thunder. I wanted to console him, but grief felt contagious. Proximity risked collapse. Instead, I stood at the foot of the bed tracing the pattern of hospital-issue blanket squares, my breath frosting the inside of my mask. I kept expecting Mom to inhale beneath the sheet by reflex, a last-ditch gasp, but the cotton stayed flat, unmoving prairie snow. The chaplain re-entered carrying a small vial of holy water and a laminated prayer card. "Would you like a blessing of the body?" he asked. Dad nodded, one abrupt dip of the chin as if giving final clearance to a departing flight. Morales sprinkled droplets across the sheet. They shimmered under fluorescent light, then vanished, absorbed by fabric still warm from living moments earlier. He read Psalm 23. The words drifted like incense, yet none of them reached me. Language felt inadequate beside the stark line dividing heartbeat from silence. I glanced at my phone. 2 unread messages from Liam, timestamp seconds after I'd texted, "Mom's gone." I couldn't open them. Letters would reorder into regret. Instead, I typed a 1-sentence announcement to the family group chat, hands trembling hard enough to invert letters. She passed at 12:07. Blue check marks bloomed almost instantly, digital chrysanthemums. A resident arrived with paperwork. Release forms, autopsy consent, decisions on organ donation. Dad and I had discussed donating her corneas, Mom's amber windows, she called them, but the resident explained time constraints. Tissue team stood by for only 12 hours post-mortem. Dad signed with the same pen that minutes earlier, surrender hope. The ink smeared where his grip faltered. He wiped the smudge with his thumb until the page tore slightly. 12:11 a.m. The transport tech entered to prep for the morgue run but paused when he saw our faces. Compassion slowed his routine. He told us we could have as much time as needed, 15 minutes, half an hour, sunrise if we wanted. Protocol allowed longer if no refrigeration crisis existed. Dad murmured, 15 is fine. I wondered how he selected the number, as though grief were a parking meter. I approached the head of the bed. The sheet reminded me of childhood forts Mom used to make, draped blankets over dining room chairs, flashlight flickering inside like a distant star. I lifted the corner just enough to see her face. Eyes closed, eyelashes clumped with dried lubricant, lips parted a breath's width. She looked serene, but death had already begun its subtle theft, skin slackening, color draining. I brushed her cheek. It yielded the coolness of unattended tea. I whispered things I never managed while she lived in tubes, that I was sorry for skipping last Thanksgiving, that her tulips really were thriving, lie now meaningless, that blueberry pancakes would forever taste bland without her off-key Sinatra. My voice trembled, but words spilled in steady stream, grief's final inventory. Dad joined, adding soft sentences about their first date in 1987, the cheap Italian restaurant, how she'd laughed at marinara stains on his shirt and said, "Messy proves you were hungry for life." He choked on the word hungry. Silence followed. Chaplain Morales hovered near the door, giving us privacy but remaining in case we fractured. His presence felt like a bookend. Once he exited, the chapter would close. 12:13 a.m. Dad reached to recover Mom's face, but I stopped him. Needed one more etched memory. I traced the sternotomy scar, now a faint ridge beneath clavicles, remembering August nights counting each beep of her heart monitor like rosary beads. Now nothing beeped, nothing ticked, nothing threatened. The quiet became deafening. The ventilator's standby mode clicked off. Respiratory therapist must have shut it remotely, and the absence of that gentle hiss felt like the room had exhaled its last breath too. 12:15 a.m. Transport tech reappeared, pushing a gurney draped in fresh, white linen. He waited, respectful statue. I placed Mom's hand under the sheet onto her abdomen, fingers curling instinctively around nothing. Dad kissed her brow. His tears fell onto fabric, leaving dark spots in the cotton, temporary constellations. The tech lowered the side rail, prepared to transfer. Chaplain Morales asked if we'd like to step outside for the move. Dad nodded. I stayed, unable to relinquish visual possession until the final pivot. As they slid her onto the morgue gurney, momentum rocked her body. A lock of hair slipped from behind her ear. I tucked it back, whispering a good night I'd rehearsed years without knowing. 12:17 a.m. The tech secured straps, lifted the head end slightly. He reached to cover her completely, but Morales requested a moment for final prayer. We bowed heads. His words floated soft. May perpetual light shine upon her. I opened my eyes, staring at the fluorescent tubes above, artificial suns that never set. Morales finished. The tech adjusted the sheet again. I glanced at the clock. 12 minutes had evaporated since time of death. Dad placed a trembling hand on the metal rail, whispered, "Ready." The tech nodded and began to wheel the gurney out. That's when the impossible primed its stage, when the universe inhaled, quietly reloading the script we thought had ended. But for these 15 minutes, time truly froze. Before miracle, before shock, before nurses would sprint back in wide-eyed disbelief. 15 minutes where death felt absolute, silence absolute, goodbye absolute. 15 minutes that would soon prove eternity can be revised without warning. I used to believe resurrections sounded like trumpets, something bold enough to rattle granite. Turns out resurrection begins with a faint scuff of rubber soles on linoleum. 12:18 a.m. Mom's gurney had rolled barely 6 feet into the hallway when Nurse Danielle called after the transport tech. Hold up a second. Her voice was soft, a question disguised as courtesy. The tech eased the gurney to a stop. Danielle bent, adjusting the sheet that draped over Mom's forehead. Her brow furrowed, a flicker I might have missed if grief hadn't sharpened my eyes to notice everything. I watched from inside room 314, half hidden behind the doorframe. Dad stood beside me, shoulders caved inward. Danielle's gloved hand hovered above Mom's cheek, uncertain. She leaned closer, too close for ritual, more like inspection. Then she straightened, glanced back at us. Did either of you touch her a moment ago? She asked. I shook my head. Danielle's lips parted, forming the outline of a hypothesis she couldn't quite voice. She pressed 2 fingers to Mom's carotid, the gesture automatic, almost reflexive. 10 seconds elapsed, an eternity measured in silence. Danielle's gaze snapped to the transport tech. Pause the transfer. I need vitals. Vitals, he echoed, confusion hitching on the word. Danielle's hand lifted to her comm badge. This is Danielle in CVICU. Requesting code. She cut herself short, realized code teams respond to life, not death. Requesting Dr. Nguyen to room 314 immediately. Dad stepped forward. What's happening? She opened her mouth, then closed it, cheeks flushing scarlet under fluorescent lights. I'm not sure. I felt something. 12:19 a.m. Nguyen rounded the corner, stethoscope swinging, hair slightly disheveled as if he'd run a hand through it too many times. Danielle? He asked, scanning our faces first, then the covered body. Danielle peeled back the sheet just enough to expose Mom's throat and chest. Nguyen palpated the carotid, gaze narrowed. 5 seconds, 10, 15, then his eyebrows jumped. I have a pulse, he whispered, as if afraid of scaring it away. My knees buckled. The corridor buckled with me. Dad caught my elbow. The transport tech muttered, impossible. Danielle reached for a portable monitor stand idling nearby, wheeled it over, clipped a pulse ox to Mom's finger. The waveform crawled across the screen, weak, irregular, but present. 36 BPM, saturation 82%. Nguyen pressed the diaphragm of his stethoscope over Mom's chest, brow furrowing deeper. Faint heart sounds. Possibly agonal, or a return of spontaneous circulation. His voice trembled on the last phrase, medical lingo for a heartbeat that refuses to remain dead. 12:20 a.m. The The corridor transformed into an overturned anthill. Danielle paged respiratory. Someone alerted the night intensivist. Alarms that had been silenced moments earlier flared alive. Monitors booted. Ventilators swung into manual settings. The tech pivoted the gurney back into room 314 as if reversing time itself. Gwyn called over his shoulder. Start low-dose epinephrine drip. Draw ABG. Lactate. We need a 12-lead ECG, stat. I hovered in the doorway, heart ricocheting. Dad moved past me, eyes glued to the monitor. The pulse accelerated to 44, then 48 BPM, still bradycardic, but undeniable life. The saturation crept to 85% under bag mask ventilation, now restarted by respiratory therapist Jana, who arrived breathless, cheeks flushed. Could be Lazarus phenomenon, she murmured, referring to the rare, almost mythical return of circulation after CPR ceases. Gwyn nodded curtly, but didn't speculate. Science could autopsy the miracle later. Now they had a patient to save. 12:22 a.m. Intravenous lines were respiked, norepinephrine, milrinone, calcium chloride. Blood gas syringe filled dark and sluggish. Lab runner darted away. Danielle repositioned the ventilator tube that had remained in place only because they hadn't extubated yet. The ventilator's screen blossomed with numbers I once feared now blooming like late roses. Tidal volume 380 milliliters, PEEP 6. Small breaths, but breaths. Gwyn looked at Dad and me. We're witnessing spontaneous circulation. It's fragile. We need to stabilize quickly. Dad gripped the bed rail, knuckles blanched. Are you saying she's alive? I'm saying we have a pulse and measurable oxygenation. He placed emphasis on measurable, as though quantification could anchor belief. 12:24 a.m. Mom's eyelids twitched beneath the tape. Not flutter, twitch. Danielle gasped. She's trying to blink. Gwyn shone a penlight. Pupils constricted, sluggish, but reactive. Jana adjusted FiO2 to 100%. The pulse climbed to 55 BPM, saturations flirting with 90. My legs finally obeyed. I stepped to the bedside, fingers trembling as I brushed hair from her forehead. Skin minutes ago cooling, felt warm. Tears blurred the bedside controls. I choked out a laugh or a sob, still uncertain which language to use for resurrection. 12:26 a.m. The night intensivist, Dr. Patel, entered, eyes wide behind rectangular frames. Gwyn presented a quick rundown. Patel asked for capnography, and tidal CO2 showed 22, low yet consistent with low perfusion states, but proof of metabolism. Patel ordered vasopressin, requested the cardiac surgeon on call. In the corner, Danielle updated Mom's chart. Time of spontaneous circulation return, 0:18. She hesitated, then erased our recorded time of death with a line, a thin black stroke crossing the border between worlds. 12:28 a.m. Labs returned, lactate dropping, potassium moderate, hemoglobin stable. ABG pH 7.12, CO2 55, acidotic but salvageable. I clung to each number like stepping stones over a void. The transplant coordinator, summoned again, arrived clenching her binder like armor. If she stabilizes, her status 1A remains, she said, voice astonished. We'll restart donor search. Dad's tears turned into laughter. Wet, bewildered. He kissed Mom's hand, telling her tulips had new orders. Bloom brighter. I whispered that Sinatra would have to write encore verses. 12:30 a.m. Patel declared, she's hemodynamically responsive. They hooked her to continuous EEG. Early traces showed slow waves but no burst suppression, flickers of neurological promise. Danielle's eyes shone behind goggles. She squeezed my shoulder. I've worked 15 years. Never seen this. I glanced at the clock. 23 minutes since Mom died. 15 minutes after we relinquished her, she had inhaled again as if to scold us for doubting persistence. The hallway outside remained sterile, subdued. In room 314, we witnessed biology renegotiating terms with eternity, scribbling a footnote under the final chapter. I pressed my forehead to Mom's, careful of tubes, and whispered, "You came back." Her eyelids flickered, barely, but enough to reshape constellations. And though monitors still screamed fragility, the room now thrummed with something bigger than hope, proof that a heart can pause its song, gather forgotten measures, and strike the downbeat again. I always thought miracles ended with the spotlight moment, the gasp, the pulse, the breath. Nobody tells you miracles demand middle chapters, negotiations, and second chances that look suspiciously like paperwork. 12:32 a.m. Dr. Patel scribbled fresh orders. Restart vasopressin. Schedule a full transthoracic echo at 1 o'clock. Prepare lab draws every hour. Between signatures, he kept muttering, astonishing, under his breath, like a student whispering the answer key. Nurse Danielle reprinted the label for Mom's wristband. The old one listed deceased in the margin and had to be cut off. It snapped like a rubber band, leaving a pale welt. A new band, identical except for the missing asterisk, circled her wrist as if rewriting identity could be that simple. Respiratory therapist Jana lowered FiO2 from 100% to 80, then 70, watching saturations hover at 92. Lungs are recruiting, she said. Like they remembered they have a day job. She smiled at her own joke, but tears rimmed her goggles. 12:45 a.m. Liam was still on video call, time-stamped by desert daylight on his end. I flipped the camera toward Mom. Ventilator hissed, balloon pump absent, new infusion lines glistening. "She's back, Lee," I said, voice cracking. He blinked, confusion morphing into shock, then into a grin so wide it outshone insomnia. "Mom always was late to leave a party," he whispered, the line glitching but carrying relief across continents. 1 a.m. Echo Tech Valerie arrived, rolling the machine like luggage through two narrow doors. Gel spread cold across Mom's sternum once more. The screen flickered with grayscale petals, left ventricle now contracting at maybe 25%. Ruinous by textbook, yet dizzyingly alive compared to the earlier 15%. Valerie looked at Nguyen, eyebrows raised. He answered with the faintest nod, real. They printed still frames and taped them to the chart like proud parents displaying ultrasound photos. Outside room 314, a ring of staff gathered, night shift nurses from oncology, ortho, even a janitor leaning on a mop. Word had traveled. They wanted proof that death's dress rehearsal could be cancelled. Hospital folklore was birthing itself in real time. Inside, Dad sat reading psalms aloud in a tremulous baritone. Each verse felt like mortar patching cracks in the air. I held Mom's hand, index finger tracing her knuckle ridges, counting them like worry beads. 2:05 a.m. ABG returned. pH 7.26, lactate 4.8, still high but falling. Patel ordered a cautious reduction of epinephrine. The arterial line traced peaks less jagged, more confident. Every metric still spelled critical, but critical now had margins. I wondered if numbers realized they were negotiating with a woman who once beat us at every board game, claiming rules were suggestions. A social worker entered with fresh transplant forms. Our previous consent dissolved when Mom was pronounced. Bureaucracy, it turned out, honors death more finally than life. We re-signed. Pen strokes steadier this time. Hope steadied them. 3 a.m. Neurology resident Dr. Chin performed a brief exam. Pupils equal and reactive. No doll's eye sign. When Chin called, "Mrs. Turner, can you squeeze my hand?" Mom's fingers curled faintly. I felt the squeeze radiate shockwaves up my arm into tectonic plates of belief. Chun grinned, scribbled purposeful movement present. 4:15 a.m. Shift change loomed. Danielle lingered though her badge blinked over time. "Wouldn't miss history," she said. She recounted hearing of 2 Lazarus cases in med school, but never seeing one. "You just became case number 3. Dad clasped her hand. "Thank you for noticing what doctors missed." Danielle shook her head. "Nurses notice the whispers," she said. "Doctors chase the shouts." 5:30 a.m. Gray pre-dawn bled into the window slots. Mom's MAP climbed to 72 on half the vasopressor dose. Patel okayed transition from propofol to lighter sedation to test neurological endurance. Ventilator settings peeled back. Mom initiated breaths, small but decisive. Each spontaneous inhale sounded like a page turning. Lactate reached 3.9. Renal numbers plateaued. Sepsis panel negative. An ICU fellow whispered, "Body's rebooting." I realized I hadn't sat in hours. Limbs ached, yet adrenaline held me upright like strings on a marionette. Dad dozed in the recliner, Bible open on his chest. His snores chorused with ventilator sighs, a duet of exhaustion and relief. 7 a.m. Day shift cardiothoracic surgeon, Dr. Flores reviewed the chart, eyes widening. "We're keeping that IABP out," she declared, "unless she tanks." She ordered diuretics for pulmonary edema and arranged consults with the transplant committee at 9 o'clock. She told us donor likelihood increased during weekdays due to traffic accidents, a grim lottery we now relied on. 8:17 a.m. Breakfast carts rattled down halls, the smell of burnt toast colliding with antiseptic. Mom's eyelids parted, iris glimmering amber like sun through whiskey. Her gaze floated, then anchored on me. First direct eye contact in 48 hours. Tears exploded before I could speak. I wiped them with gown sleeves, laughed through sobs, whispered, "You came back, remember?" Her mouth twitched around the tube, a ghost of a smile, an echo of Sinatra croons. It was enough. I leaned close, telling her about the sunrise she'd missed. Peach streaks over the parking deck, pigeons arguing on the ledge. She blinked once, acknowledgement. 9 a.m. Transplant committee convened via teleconference. Flores presented vitals, echo, labs. Consensus. Keep her listed at status 1A. I half expected them to downgrade because she no longer hovered over a cliff. They didn't. Miracles merit urgency, Flores said. Coordinator nodded. When the call ended, Danielle, day shift now, taped a new status sheet above the bed. Priority. Immediate transplant. Letters bold as sirens. I stepped into the hallway bathed in full daylight. Overnight staff departed with red-rimmed eyes. Incoming nurses greeted me with cautious smiles, as if touching the miracle might smudge it. I found a corner, texted Liam. She squeezed my hand. "We're back in the fight." Phone buzzed with his reply. Mom never left the fight. She was just catching her breath. I laughed, startling passers-by. And somewhere deep inside room 314, a borrowed heart still awaited, but Mom's stitched-together warrior heart kept drumming against statistics, refusing encore instructions. We weren't safe, but we were sailing, rudder cracked, sails torn, yet prow bending toward a horizon nobody expected to see again. The 48 hours that followed felt like living inside a paused heartbeat, poised between life and the promise of more life. Mom's own heart, paper-thin and stubborn, still pumped under a pharmacological spotlight. Every alarm made nurses flinch. Every sigh from the ventilator made Dad clench his jaw. We were winning skirmishes, yet bracing for the final battle that only a donor heart could finish. Tuesday, 10 a.m. Coordinator Rodriguez strode in with a tablet, ponytail crisp, eyes ringed by 5-day circles. "No suitable donors overnight," she said. "We expand the radius. Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, even western Pennsylvania." Her finger pinched a map wider, as if stretching the geography itself might summon a miracle. I asked how many AB-positive donors had appeared nationwide this month. She said 4. Hope recalculated itself into odds uglier than Russian roulette. Mom rested in propofol twilight, lighter now, enough to blink on command. When I mentioned transplant, she squeezed my hand, one slow contraction that said, "I understand." But each squeeze felt like sand through an hourglass. Noon, a fragile plateau. Dr. Patel adjusted her medications, tapering norepinephrine another notch. MAP hovered around 70. Ventilator FiO2 down to 60%, PEEP 5. Chest x-rays showed reduced pulmonary edema. Dad dared a half-smile. But platelet count dropped. Heparin-induced thrombocytopenia whispered risk. Hematology recommended argatrobin. Every solved problem invited a sequel. 3 p.m. Physical therapy attempted passive range of motion exercises. Mom's fingers curled, ankles flexed. I played Frank Sinatra's Fly Me to the Moon for my phone. Dad hummed along. Mom's pulse climbed 5 beats, like tiny applause. 4:17 p.m. An alert on the hallway dashboard flashed amber. Trauma code ETA 10 minutes. Helicopter landing. My breath snared. Trauma meant potential donor. Rodriguez reappeared, already on her phone reciting blood types. We need AB-positive cross-match workup immediately. The ICU stilled except for rotor thumps outside. Mom's monitor ticked on, ignorant of negotiations overhead. 30 minutes later Rodriguez returned, shoulders sagging. Head injury non-survivable but cross-match A-negative, she said softly. Incompatible. She apologized like it was a habit humanitarian professionals practice daily. Dad whispered, next time, yet his voice cracked. Evening, the setback. At 7:43 p.m. Mom's pulse oximeter alarm shrieked. SpO2 slumped to 82. Chest auscultation revealed crackles, fluid creeping back into alveoli. Patel ordered 4 bumetanide, restarted low-dose vasopressors. I stood useless while respiratory therapy increased PEEP. The balloon of hope deflated with each exhale the ventilator gave. Gwyn reviewed a fresh echo. Yef dipped from 25 to 18. We're back in slippery territory, he muttered. He suggested reinserting an IABP. Surgery team prepped. Dad looked at me. Eyes saying not again, but we nodded approval. By 10 p.m. the pump thumped in her aorta again. Diastole inflate, systole deflate, lifting pressure 3 merciful millimeters of mercury. Mom's feet turned warmer, but our spirits chilled. We weren't outrunning biology. We were patching potholes on a collapsing road. Wednesday, 2:30 a.m. Rodriguez woke us from half-sleep. Possible donor in St. Louis. Critical head trauma. AB positive. 6 hours out. My pulse sprinted. She cautioned. Family undecided on donation. We'll know by sunrise. Sunrise suddenly had mass. It could weigh everything or nothing. I spent the night talking to Mom, voice a hush between pumps and drips. I reminded her of the lakeside half-marathon she once ran with me cheering. Her eyelids fluttered twice, coded Morse for keep talking. Wednesday, 7 a.m., false dawn. Sunlight burst across room 314 like confetti, painting her monitor a hopeful gold. Rodriguez called at 7:05. Donor family declined. Dad closed his eyes, breathed, their grief, their choice. I slammed my fist into the bathroom's paper towel dispenser, metal echoing guilt, but delivering no heart. Noon. Inflammatory markers rose. Infectious disease consult found no pathogen. Still they started broad-spectrum antibiotics, just in case hope needs sterile soil. I scrolled social media donation groups, reading stories of hearts flown cross-country. One post read, "Miracles arrive on ice." I wondered how cold ours would have to be before it turned everything warm again. Afternoon storm. Thunderheads built outside. Barometric pressure plummeted. Inside, pressures rode the pump's mechanical tides. The weather felt personal, as though the sky mirrored our stalled momentum. Lightning flickered. Monitors flashed. Briefly, I couldn't tell which belonged to nature. 5:20 p.m. Dad pulled me aside. "We need contingency," he said. ECMO remained last resort. Patel warned its mortality curve soared without transplant within days. Dad's jaw set. Then days is what we buy. I felt the ground tilt but nodded. Love sometimes bankrolls impossible loans. Night, prayer vigil. Hospital chaplaincy announced a midnight prayer circle, for staff too, not just family. We gathered in the chapel Mom had slept under in silence so many times. Candlelight danced on stained glass. We formed a lopsided circle of scrubs and tears. I spoke aloud. If there's another mother out there whose family can find meaning in donation, guide their hearts. My voice quivered over the word hearts, plural, because by then I knew survival always borrows from multiple chests. Back in the ICU, Danielle whispered that Mom's numbers held steady. "She's waiting," she said, smoothing a blanket. I kissed Mom's temple, tasted the antiseptic swab's trace on her skin. 1:27 a.m. Pager beeped in the quiet. Rodriguez's code. Potential donor, Milwaukee. Status brain death pending confirm. AB positive. Age 28. I felt weightlessness. Confirmation expected within the hour. Organ retrieval team prepping.
Dad, squeeze my hand.
This one, he said, voice thin yet steeled by 28 hours of resume. We stood by Mom's bed, monitors ticking, balloon pump hissing, the ventilator's breaths synchronizing with our whispered promises. In that moment, I realized hope wasn't a straight line. It was a stubborn spiral, circling despair, tightening closer to the target with every lap. And as the elevator dinged somewhere down the hall, I believed the next door to open might finally carry the chilled heart that would relight the one beneath my palm. 1:28 a.m. The pager still vibrated in my hand when Rodriguez called a second time, this time, breathless joy sparking through the line. Family has consented. Cross-match looks perfect. Heart retrieval team lifts off from Milwaukee in 40 minutes. 40 minutes. An entire universe can collapse and reform in that sliver of time, yet for us it felt like the first straight path we'd had in days. Dad let out a bark of laughter that shattered the hush in room 314. Even the balloon pump seemed to pulse louder, as if cheering. Dr. Flores re-entered at once, coat half-buttoned, cell phone pressed to her ear coordinating or availability, perfusionist schedules, blood bank releases. Wheels up 2:15, she confirmed. ETA Mercy helipad 3:05 if weather holds. Outside, storm clouds began limping east, rain tapering. Like even the sky understood punctuality. Nurses Danielle and Kira pivoted the room into pre-op gear. Central line dressings replaced, antibiotics hung, coag labs drawn. I clipped Mom's hair into a loose bun the way she liked when gardening. When I whispered we'd found her new heart, her eyelids fluttered, 3 deliberate blinks that felt like sign language for I'm ready. 2:05 a.m., the waiting hour. The next 60 minutes were a study in kinetic stillness. ICU corridors buzzed, forms printed, consents re-signed, again. Blood units cross-checked, equipment sterilized. Mom's vitals hovered, MAP 70, SpO2 90, 4 on 55% FiO2, balloon pump timing perfect. She looked peaceful despite the cables spider-webbing her chest. I traced the anatomical journey out loud. Your old heart pumped Illinois watercolors, Mom. This new one will learn Chicago blues. Dad chuckled, kissed her knuckles. 2:40 a.m., airborne. Rodriguez texted, heart airborne. 25 minutes out. She added a single red heart emoji, digital shorthand for the organ winging its way through clouds. I pictured the vacuum-sealed cooler cradled by a flight nurse whose job tonight was to chauffeur destiny across state lines. 2:52 a.m., trouble over Lake Michigan. Radar pinged bad news. Patchy fog rolling off the lake. Flight control considered diverting. Flores's jaw tightened. She barked into her phone. Visuals clear at Mercy. Runway lights max, we can take them. I held my breath so hard my ribs cramped. 10 minutes later control relented. Landing approved. 3:06 a.m., arrival. The rotor thump echoed down stairwells like a war drum. I pressed against the ICU window, helicopter silhouette descending, landing lights winking. In that moment I realized how fragile good news looks, just a red cooler exiting a metal bird. Rodriguez and the transplant fellows sprinted beside a rolling cart draped in sterile cloth. Dad and I glimpsed only flashes, blue scrubs, white lid, a tag labeled A+, donor blood type, and AB+ recipient. Security cleared elevators, or 3 lights glowed amber. In use, sterile field. 3:15 a.m., goodbye again. They'd re-prepped Mom, scrubbing her chest with betadine until amber streaks pooled like sunset. Flores squeezed my shoulder. Cold, ischemic time ticking. We have under 4 hours total. We'll aim for 90 minutes. She spoke like a commander before battle, voice steel wrapped in warmth. I leaned over Mom. Tubes separated us, but not enough to mute heartbeat on the monitor. 56 BPM. New engine on its way, I whispered. Hold on a little longer. She blinked once, and I swear the line on the screen climbed a pixel higher. Surgical transport arrived, a team of silent blue phantoms. They transferred Mom to the gurney, balloon pump trailing like an obedient pet. Dad squeezed her hand until the last second. This goodbye hurt differently. Sharp, hopeful. 3:27 a.m. Outside or 3. Amber lights barred entry. A circulating nurse collected our phone numbers for updates. We stood in hallway glare, alone except for muffled speakers announcing, knife to skin, at 3:31. I imagined scalpels glinting, saws humming, perfusionists priming circuits with icy saline. Above all, I imagined the moment the donor heart would awaken under Floris's gloved touch. 4:04 a.m. Text update number 1. Old heart out, cross clamp on. New heart being sewn. My legs gave out. I slid down the wall to cold linoleum. Dad sat beside me, back against cinderblock, whispering Hail Marys between stats courses he once taught. Each minute felt like a bead on a rosary of seconds. 4:29 a.m. Text update number 2. Reperfusion started. Blood now coursed through new chambers. Somewhere behind those doors, an EKG strip flickered its first tentative bumps. I pictured it like a hesitant child testing ice. 4:37 a.m. Silence. No updates. 5, 10, 15 minutes. Silence louder than alarms. My mind spiraled. Rejection, arrhythmia, technical bleed. Dad clutched his pager as if heat from his palm could summon vibration. 4:48 a.m. Text update number 3. We have rhythm, sinus 78. Weaning off bypass. I sobbed, a sound raw, animal, yet blessed. Dad laughed, then cried, then laughed again, the echo curving down the hallway like a jazz riff. 5:12 a.m. Chest closed. The doors finally parted. Floris emerged, eyes shining behind fogged loops. Surgery successful, she said. Heart strong. She's back on minimal support. Dad gripped her hands, repeating thank you until language fractured. 5:25 a.m. Post-op ICU bay. Mom returned, chest bandaged, ventilator hissing a gentler lullaby. The monitor displayed a heart rate of 82, numbers marching confidently. Arterial pressure 104/64, never looked more elegant. Floris warned the next 72 hours were critical. Primary graft dysfunction, rejection risk, infection, but her voice carried triumph. I stood by Mom's bedside, fingertips on the warm pulse of her wrist, same wrist that wore a deceased tag hours earlier. The new heart's lube-dub thudded under the dressing, foreign yet protective, like a guardian knight taking first watch. Dad whispered, "That's someone else's son beating inside her." The sentence humbled me. Grief and gratitude fused into one immense ache. We vowed to write the donor family as soon as protocol allowed, to tell them their loss now drew breath in every room Mom would walk into. As dawn bled pink through blinds, nurses adjusted drips and typed chart notes under soft lamplight. I brushed hair from Mom's forehead and imagined future Sundays filled with pancakes, tulips, and maybe Sinatra's shifting keys for whatever rhythm this borrowed heart preferred. Outside, birds began their tentative morning arguments. Inside, a brand new rhythm tapped a steady percussion against the hush, time rewound, futures rewritten, and the impossible now pulsing right under my palms. The first 3 days after surgery felt like balancing crystals on a drumhead. Every hour brought another. If her kidneys tolerated tacrolimus, if the graft escaped primary dysfunction, if the biopsy showed no hyperacute rejection. Hour 12. Mom opened her eyes. They drifted around the room until they locked on mine. Even through sedation, haze, she looked astonished to still be here. I mouthed new heart, tapped my chest. Tears welled. Monitors dutifully recorded the spike. Hour 24. A bronzed cardiologist threaded a biopsy catheter through Mom's jugular. The sample looked like a crimson comma, punctuation in this new paragraph of her life. Pathology returned grade 0, rejection. Nurses cheered under their breath. Hour 48. Ventilator settings reached minimal support. Respiratory therapist Jana asked Mom to inhale, exhale, then cough. Her first cough sounded like gravel, but it was hers. Weaning began. Hour 60. Extubation. The tube slid free. Mom whispered water. Her voice, ragged yet alive, filled the room like hymn fragments. When Dr. Flores proclaimed stable for step-down, Dad brought a potted tulip from home. One lone bloom she'd planted months earlier. He set it on the windowsill. The petals opened exactly at sunrise, as if following doctor's orders. Today marks 12 months since the night I watched a white sheet turn into a resurrection cape. Mom and I celebrated by walking 3 laps around the lakeside path. She wears a medical ID that reads, "Heart transplant May 4th," but strangers only notice the scar peeking above her neckline when wind lifts her hair. She calls it her second zipper. Dad completed chemo. Remission glows in his lab work. Liam transferred closer to home and spends Sundays helping Mom replant the tulip beds. Sometimes we find ourselves counting heartbeats the way others count blessings. Honestly, they're the same thing. We wrote the donor's parents. Their reply arrived on lavender stationery. Knowing our son's heart paints your sunrises keeps us upright. Mom framed the letter beside the telemetry strip that captured her first post-transplant rhythm. When people ask what happened that night, I say, death missed its cue and medicine improvised grace. But the truest explanation is simpler. A heartbeat refused to stay silent and taught us that every goodbye can be an ellipsis instead of a period. So if you're standing in an ICU at 2 a.m., listening to machines declare endings, remember my mother. Remember that a quiet monitor can blink again, that a heart on ice can thaw into hymns, and that sometimes the impossible clocks back in for one more shift. Because in our story, and maybe in yours, death didn't win. Persistence did.